repeat guest here at the Taste Talks. Gemma's got a new hat today. Susan. How are you doing today, Ted? Are you good?
Doing very well. No complications, no problems.
Love that. It's cold where you're at, Gemma? Yeah, it's cold here too. I had to put my space heater on in my conference room. Oh yes, great Negronis yesterday at Thirsty Thursday, Deb. Perfect. Did you make one along with him? Excellent. I love that. Gotta love an interactive taste talk. So, hi, Michael. Nice to see you. And Susan.
How's everybody? Ted, you doing all right?
Doing great.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, we're gonna wait just a few more minutes in case there's any late arrivals, and then we will kick it off. Oh, Monica, you loved the sushi demo. Yeah, I think that Chef Pork did a really amazing job with that as well. And here comes Deb joining us. So you're badly craving sushi. Well, I hope you can get what he had in order to recreate that yourself, or do it with tuna. I mean, it didn't have to be the salmon. If you've got tuna, pouches of tuna or cans of tuna, you definitely can do that too. So it's all, you know what, with the sushi, it's so much about the rice. So the rice is very, very important. All right, we're getting a lot of folks coming in here. It's exciting. All right, again, I'd like to request that everyone please keep themselves muted. If you have any questions or comments, please make use of I can't even show you my pen, of the chat down below. If you just move your cursor around, the chat should pop up, and you can then type and let me know any of your questions at all. And feel free during the presentation to put any of your questions at any time. Ted will be continuing with his presentation. I will be monitoring that. And if it's something that needs to be asked at the time that he is speaking, I will interject and get a clarification. Or if it's something that can wait till the end, we will hold it until the end of the presentation. Let's see, we got one more person joining us. Still hasn't made it in here yet. I want to see if we can get him in before we start. All right, a couple more people, bringing them in right now. Okay. All right, so I would like to welcome everyone. Happy Friday. We are very excited for it to be Friday. Yeah, Deb. So if you do not know me, my name is Christine Duke. I am the Continuing Education Program Manager for Kendall College, and I created the Taste Talks as an opportunity for us to have some small educational sessions that also entertain during the week, so that people can enrich themselves and get a little bit more. So we like to invite, of course, our students, but also members of the Kendall at National Louis community and people who are also in the industry. If you have friends and family that you think would be interested in joining us, anyone that you know personally, please, you are always welcome to share the information for any of the Taste Talks and welcome them to come along. It is the more the merrier here at our Taste Talks. We are very excited to have a hospitality discussion today, and Ted Mandigo is joining us to kind of give us a little insight on the hotel and lodging industry in the city of Chicago and some of the things they have done in the past when they've had some economic downturns and stumbles that have shown that the industry is something that is very resilient and can bounce back. So we'd like to talk a little bit about that. I'd like to remind you one more time, please, all mics, keep them on mute. If you have any questions or anything at all, please put it in the chat. And Ted, if you would like to take it away, please.
All right. Thank you very much. As some of you know, I've been doing hospitality consulting and services in the industry since in Chicago since 1970. Started out, one of the first projects that we did was the development work on the Ritz-Carlton Chicago that opened in 1972. So we followed the market for quite a period of time, and we've gone through several different cycles in that market over the years. If you can put up the first of the charts that we have, we'll take a quick look at what those cyclical patterns are like over the first since 1960. And we tend to go with about a 7 to 10 year cycle, starting out with a downturn in the economy, and then taking about 3 to 4 years to recover and come back up to a stabilized level. We tend to work with about 3 to 5 years of fairly strong performance, and then we start seeing the front end of a downturn in the cycle again as we go through. The first of the cycles, is the chart up?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just having some issues on my own over
okay.
here because I lost
All
all of the chat and everything, so I'm trying to get back to that. Give me 1 second. Okay.
All right,
Yeah.
fine.
So sorry.
But as we go forward, a lot of the statistics and information that I've got and that we are presenting has been put together by Rick Mandigo, who is teaching feasibility studies and revenue management at Kendall. And we have a database that goes back to the 1960s showing trends and developments, including monthly data and in some cases daily data performance of the market area. So we get some pretty good historic information. To give you an idea of the cyclical pattern of business in the market area, we looked at the daily data, and we found that during our peak, and that's the uptick between about 2015 through 2019, that we had in Chicago over 140 days during the year when we had a 90% occupancy or greater. So we wind up with some very, very strong peaks. We also wind up with some off-peak periods that normally are a November, December, January, and February, where our occupancy levels are in the 40s and 50s. So that cyclical pattern requires a big offset during the peak period, the spring convention season and the fall convention season, and a very strong summer tourism. That averages us out with occupancy levels in the most recent uptick in the market in the 75% level on an ongoing basis for the downtown properties. If you take 9 months at an 80% occupancy and you take 4 months at a 50% occupancy, the average comes out at 70. So we're constrained to a certain extent by seasonal variation patterns. The chart that you see in front of you shows a cyclical pattern starting in 1960 and the various downturns in the market that occurred over that period. Pick up a time period in 1962 when we had some very, very high inflation rates and rising interest rates. In 1972, the Feds picked up the interest rate again, and that leading interest rate rise basically curtailed a lot of corporate development activity in the market area. And you can see the fall off that occurred in 72. In 76, we had another downturn in the economy, and that was the oil crisis. And we're in the middle of the Vietnam War, or wrapping up the Vietnam War at that time. Then we move forward to 1982, and you can see the 2 years of really downturn market when the Fed interest rate rose and had a huge impact on business spending. In 1990, we moved ahead to another recession when we had the savings and loan crisis bailed out by the federal government, and you wound up with a lot of properties that were foreclosed on, operated by banks and lenders, then taken over by the government, and then resold in the market area by the Resolution Trust Corporation, restoring those properties back to the market area. We think that we're going to see some of that's going to occur as a consequence of the COVID-19 virus and foreclosures, and we'll see some properties that will go through that foreclosure, recycling, and re-enter the market through either the current financial lenders that repossess properties and then resell them in the market area to new operators. In 2001, we hit the dot-com crisis and the Y2K, and you can see the downturn there. And it took us about 3 years to work our way through that one with a slower recovery. The most recent one, of course, is 2010 with a subprime mortgage crisis. That was a big downturn, caused a real recession. It took us about 2 years to get our feet back under us and regroup and come back out of the market area. This chart is the Chicago Metro. And so you can see that in 2016, we had a little mini dip in the market area. And it's funny that we talk with people about that and say, why did that occur? And I tell them that was the Summer Olympics. And why would that impact Chicago? Well, we were bidding on the Summer Olympics at that point in time, and a lot of conventions that would normally be held in Chicago booked in other locations. And so we had a downturn in the market in 2016. Then you can see that we're looking at 2020, and you can see a dramatic cliff that occurs there. And the reason why that is so dramatic at this point in time is because the composition of the market in Chicago is primarily convention oriented. We serve at least half of the people that stay in hotel rooms as a basis for trade shows, conventions, and other events that are group activities. And with a curtailment of all group activities, basically that business is shut down. And when you shut down half of your business, occupancy levels are expected to drop very substantially. And we need to see a point when that restriction on group travel is lifted before we're going to see a very substantial recovery. We foresee a pretty solid resilience coming back in 2021, recovering a good portion of the lost occupancy, and then a slower recovery over the next couple of years as we see the market pick up. But that gives you a quick overview, and it gives you the fact that we're in a cyclical business. We expect downturns. Those downturns are caused by a variety of different occurrences. Part of them are economic in nature. Part of them are other incidents, what we call a black swan that occurs that causes big downturns in the market. Black swans like the year 2000 and a change to a new decade when we didn't think computers were going to be able to handle that transition, and other events and a fall off in the level of technology. So those black swans reoccur regularly. This is one of the biggest black swans we've ever seen in terms of the hospitality industry, and it is having a very, very dramatic effect. The curtailment of convention activity and trade shows was exacerbated by the drop off in international travel. And while Chicago only has about 10% of their business from international travel, it still is a significant additional impact on top of that COVID-19 curtailment of all of that business area. Let's take a look at the next chart, which is a historic periodic change chart. And that illustrates some other factors that we consider. The green line that you see is the occupancy level for Chicago, and it's change in occupancy year over year, so it's not the same pattern of business, but it's when the occupancy drops and then recovers. The blue line that you see is the GDP, and that's matched with the occupancy level. And you can see that there is some parallel to GDP, gross domestic product activity, and occupancy level in the market area. The one that surprises us very much is the ADR, which is the red line. And we're kind of disconnected from the occupancy level and GDP when we look at the ADR, average daily rate performance of properties. And it shows some interesting dynamics and opportunities in the market area where recoveries and recessions don't necessarily reflect positioning of the average daily rate, and sometimes it's a contrary movement, particularly as we went through the 1980s and 1990s when average daily rate continued to climb, despite the fact that we had gone through a couple of recessions in 1998, 1999. And so rate is a little bit disconnected. One of our biggest concerns during the current crisis is the fact that rates have plummeted so substantially, and that draws down the average daily rate, overall performance, and the ability of properties to sustain. When your occupancy drops substantially, that's one impact on the performance. But when you also cut your rate at the same time, it really decimates the revenue per available room, which is the lifeblood of hotel operations. In fact, the revenue per available room was reported during last week at $15.61. And that's the average revenue per room, whether it's leased or not. And to put that in perspective, we'll just run some quick numbers. If you had a property that has about $150,000 a room value, and you've got a 60% loan at, say, historically 6% interest, your debt service on a daily basis is about $14.80. So with a RevPAR of $15.61, there's not much leeway after you pay the mortgage, if you can pay the mortgage. So that really is one that causes a great deal of concern. And if rates weren't dropped as precipitously, those RevPAR numbers would probably be in the $20, $22 range. One of the things that pulls the rates down, however, is the fact that the hotels are also picking up more extended stay people as a baseline business, and also have government contracts that cover housing emergency workers or long-term contracts or even complimentary rooms for people that are in the medical profession. And that includes people that are staying in hotels to quarantine themselves from family because they've been exposed, or are trapped in Chicago and can't fly out because of limited airline flights and possibly potential of being infected by the virus, as well as people that are in positions that need to be available for their offices and are staying downtown rather than commuting back and forth. Take a look at a couple of the bars that are there, and those dark gray bars represent the bottom of the market area. And a part of what we saw there are some parallel times when we also had some virus activity that impacted the market. One of those was in the SARS epidemic, and that one was one where, in fact, the Toronto airport was actually closed to stop the spread of SARS. And a lot of airline traffic and travel was discouraged. And we saw a fairly strong impact on the market area then. We'll take a look and see what China looked like in just a minute on that. But we also had the MERS, Middle Eastern, in 2012. We hit the avian flu in 2013, and then we also had Ebola scares and Ebola epidemic in 2014-15, and that's still ongoing, and that's that wider bar to the right side of the chart. So you can see that we're influenced by a couple of different things. We're influenced by economic conditions. We also get hit by black swan impacts that exacerbate the downturn in the market. If we take a look at the third chart that we have, this is an illustration that picks up the SARS epidemic, and that SARS shows a real downturn in the market in China, where occupancies dropped precipitously. They went down into the 18 to 20% level. Average daily rates went down as well. And that was a huge drop, but you can see the recovery that occurred in China for the SARS, and went back up from a 20% to a 30%, and then back up and stabilized and almost normalized back in about 2 years later, late in 2003. And then the market went back to its typical cycles that it previously handled. One of the factors that came to play in that, however, is that China tends to bring a lot of resources to play when they wind up with an epidemic of this nature. A lot of that was government people, medical personnel, and others that were in the market area reacting to it that helped that recovery. We also are seeing some of that impact in major metropolitan areas like New York, where the occupancy level is actually stabilized in the hotel operation, and then is even picked up by about 10% as outside people have come in to assist in that market area and help in the recovery area. In a normal recession, if we take a look at the next chart, these are the recovery periods that we normally see from an event. And this one that we have is September 11th was kind of an event. We were already in a recession when the terrorist attack occurred in 9/11. And occupancies dropped because of restricted travel requirements and a lot of cutbacks in activity. But you can see that it takes about 4 months after an event of that nature, once the immediate impact is over, before we climb out and recover. So this tells me that if we take a look at where we are now and we get some easing of restrictions, that the market will recover and come back up to our current level. Well, it's not going to come back to the current level, but it will come back and do some recovery and will regain some of that lost business. The big factor that hits us here is in Chicago, we are a major convention market. And unless we get an easing of the limitation on group activity, it's going to be very difficult to recover when we've got half of our market is basically eliminated by requirements on group gathering. And when it does come back, we expect it's going to come back a little bit slowly as both businesses and individual travelers for conventions and trade shows may take a conservative approach to whether they end events or not, depending upon the level of containment of the SARS, of the COVID epidemic, and whether or not there are vaccinations or treatments that are going to give us a more solid response to that. But even during the financial crisis in 2008, you can see that the impact was slower coming in, and it took about 2 or 3 months from the start of that before we hit the bottom in occupancy. But our recovery was a little bit shorter when it was financial rather than an outside black swan, that kind of in the market area. Take a look at the next slide, and that gives an historic and projected in Chicago. And where we are currently is about at the bottom of that market. And we are anticipating that what will happen this year and performance of the market is that we will finish the first part of this year at about a 25% occupancy level. We had a very good January and February compared to last year, but March and April are disasters, of course, and occupancy levels in many properties are in the single digits. And we expect that that's going to continue on for the month of April, and May will be a very light month. And if we have things under control and start reopening things in June, then that means that we will probably wind up with about a 25% occupancy for the first half of the year. We anticipate the second half of the year, assuming that things are under control, at about a 50% occupancy, but the combined numbers then give us about a 37% for this year. So we're looking at that as a performance. We're looking at the average daily rate for this year to drop below $150. It is currently about $218 end of year last year. So that's going to be a $65 drop in average daily rate. Moving into the next year, then we are expecting that the occupancy levels are going to be back into the low 60s. We don't expect to get back to the 75% level given the supply of hotel rooms in the market area and a slow recovery of the convention market. People that got used to having meetings online and find that a reasonable substitute for some of the business activity and meeting activity. We think that the market's really going to stabilize at or below 70% level rather than getting back to the 75% long run. But the good news is there's about a 2 to 3 year recovery. Properties have paired staff back. They tend to be able to operate now at a break-even level that we historically called about 60%. And now with staffing restrictions and cutbacks and other expenses and economies of operation, those properties tend to be able to operate now at a break-even at 60% or even in the high 50s for most properties. The luxury properties are handicapped by a lot of staffing level requirements and service requirements. That places their break-even point in the mid-60s as opposed to the high. That basically is what our outlook is for the next couple of years going forward. And with that, are we at about a half an hour? And we said that we would be
Yep, we're
answer questions.
We're about a half an hour or so. Do you have anything else you would like to say? Because I do have one question that has come in for you.
Okay. Well, one of the things that we're seeing properties doing, and I'll just wrap up with that, is that during this recession, we have about 20% of our rooms in downtown Chicago are closed. That's about about 8,000 rooms. And that those numbers come out of the occupancy calculation. If we added all of those in, the occupancy level in downtown Chicago would be single digits with all the rooms represented in that total sample. But STR reports are based upon rooms available to rent and exclude those that are closed, not available. That's a part of it. So those properties are closed, but they're closed temporarily. Those are properties that will come back in the market. Will come back in having done the things that properties are doing now, which is continuing on with their aggressive marketing program, looking at new strategies, doing deep cleaning, getting set up, and preparing for a reopening. And even those properties that are running low occupancies that have retained some of their staff are going through some of those processes so that when you come back to the hotels, they'll be refreshed at least, if not renovated. And you're going to have a different approach. People are using this time in the downturn to take a look at marketing strategies, going back and recontacting their business clients and contacts, testing the market for group meetings to see if they can't be rescheduled later in the year as restrictions are lifted. So those that are putting good solid marketing plans together are going to come back faster than those that basically just reopen and wait for the market to recover. activity during this time period is going to give properties a really questions.
Okay, so actually we had, because they can see the slides I have coming up, we had someone ask to see the next slide, the 2 stages of the recovery event. So do you want to just talk a little bit about this?
Absolutely, yeah. We think that assuming that restrictions are lifted, that we will get local and domestic travel, and these are going to be a surge of postponed vacations, travel, people coming out from restriction or sheltering at home are going to say, let's go somewhere, let's see something different. So you're going to see that picked up, and you're going to see some postponed vacations, both coming into Chicago and potentially going to the suburban areas and rural areas of the state. So you're going to see a pickup in travel probably during this summer, coming off from the shelter at home requirements. And this necessary business demand as properties open up is going to come back, and that's going to be people that are planning, redoing strategies for store operation, continuing to meld both bricks and mortar operation and mail order that picked up during the time when we were closing. And that's going to be a part of that short-term recovery. And that's why we look at probably a low 60s next year or the last half of this year. Stage 2 is going to be when international travel is opened up again, negotiated corporate business comes back from major corporations, and then conventions. And we think that that's going to be reduced in size and scope. And we were on a trend line for changes in the convention industry in any event. But this will exacerbate curtailment or changes in conventions. And conventions will be probably where they were 50% of our business will be probably 35% of our business going forward. And conventions are going to be a different activity than they were historically. Use less floor space, attendance won't be as strong. There'll be more regional conventions than majors. And one of the things that occurred just before this pandemic is that there were a lot of cities that were building convention facilities and convention hotels that will be bidding for some of the business that Chicago had a pretty captive audience for because of the facilities and amenities. I don't expect that to rebound back to previous levels in the immediate future.
Okay, so another question that I had come in was, what can hotels do in the future to prepare for such situations as this?
That's a cash flow situation, and it says that. And one of the things that's happened is that hotels that are strapped for cash flow have had some relief in the area of being able to use transient lodging tax and sales tax to meet some current expenses, of course, with the requirement that those be repaid at a future date. Also, chains have come back and modified BIP requirements or renovation requirements that were pretty strong last year as the economy was strong, and they were requiring a lot of renovation, repositioning, redoing lobbies to make congregate spaces in the lobby area, which you can't use now. And so taking those restrictions off, they're even getting lenders to release some of those renovation funds to use those for cash flow activity. A lot of properties have a line of credit, and they've used those. They're negotiating with banks and lenders for change terms or extension or period of time when they can capitalize payments that they would be normally making and extend the length of the loan to get out from under the current situation. And there's going to have to be some real big concessions made by lenders and sources of capital in order to pull the industry out. And the choice is you can either own the property, which you probably don't want to own for the next 6 months, or you can make those concessions and let the owner in there work with the property to retain their equity interest in it and recover. So we're going to see a lot of negotiations with lenders and sources of funds.
Okay. How have hotel banquets, events, and sales been impacted in the Chicago market historically? Has hotel sales and events followed the same trends as occupancy rates and recovery, or has it been different trends in recovery?
It's been a little bit different trend in recovery for the food and beverage operations within the hotel. Typically, you capture a portion of the guest in the hotel in the food service operation, and hotels haven't had as great a participation of on the street restaurants, with a few exceptions, as they did back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when hotel dining was elegant dining. We basically gave that away to chain restaurant operators and individual restaurant operators around the city, and did not effectively manage or operate food service operation. But hotels still have a substantial amount of banquet meeting space, and that banquet meeting space will recover, because what we are seeing is a reduction in the amount of office space that people have, and an ongoing need to get people together, particularly those that are working from home. And you're going to have periodic meetings that are held in a central location, and offices don't have the expansive boardrooms and other spaces. So hotels become a natural fallback for that. So we'll see some of that business come back. One of the challenges may be that if restrictions remain in place, that there may be a short-term requirement that spacing be different in banquets. I don't think we're going to see 10 top tables in banquet seating in the short term. It's going to be 6 or 8 tops. Spacing in restaurants are going to be cutting down on the seating capacity, where you have a 90-seat restaurant, it may be cut back to 60 seats to restrict or space people out. So we need to modify or adapt to a lower volume of operation on whatever requirement.
Okay, I have another question. Now, do you know anything about how layoffs and hiring may occur with these cycles?
Typically, hotels, as occupancy comes up, a lot of the people are people that are on call, if you will. And as occupancy picks up, then housekeeping staff is going to be pulled back in as occupancy grows or forecasts of occupancy come about. And when we get back to the 50% occupancy level, we're going to be basically back to what our full-time staffing is in housekeeping. The rest of that's going to be part-time people and on-call people to jump from that 50%. I mean, this is staffing levels that are basically November, December, January, February operations, and hotels sustain that on an annual basis. And this is no different than staffing for that time period when business is in the shoulder season. We're just going to have a longer shoulder season. The temporary help and part-time people will get called back in as we hit peaks and as conventions come back and pump those on.
Okay. How should the City of Chicago's tourism groups, such as Choose Chicago, what should they do to retain and regain the market?
They ought to be out there in the back pocket of all of those conventions that were canceled, talking with them about reschedule, to see if there's any possibility of something being done in the fall convention season, because there will be space for them. They also should be talking with them about the next years coming up, so that they can renegotiate or ensure that they are moving forward with the conventions. And they ought to be aggressively marketing to the groups that they could not have accommodated before, because now they have space. A group that used to take 1 million square foot of floor space, maybe taking 750,000 square feet next year. 250,000 square feet is a lot of space for a smaller convention to tuck in. And with 2 headquarters hotels and other rooms down in the McCormick area, there's some great opportunities.
Okay. Any advice to current hospitality students looking to start working in a hotel in the next year? Are there positions or certifications to consider that might help? or even different types of properties to consider, like resorts or something else?
Yeah, I would number one, make sure that you understood the revenue management side of that, and that's going to be a key to recovery and getting back on a stable financial footing. So revenue management, I think, is an important aspect of it. The other thing is to learn from what's happening now and look at the kinds of actions that managers are taking in terms of back in staff and streamlined operations, and be prepared to step into an environment that is going to be a little bit demanding and challenging. And those people are going to have the hotels are going to have good, skilled individuals, knowledgeable individuals, because they're going to have turned over part of their staff, and they're going to have to train those, get them up to speed, manage them, and efficiently operate. Plus, despite the fact that there's probably going to be some 2,000 rooms lost in the market that will never come back, there are 2,000 rooms under construction. There's 1,000 rooms that are under construction that will open this year. They slowed down a little bit of the construction because there were no rush to get them into the market. And there's another 1,300 rooms that are under construction that were open next year. They probably will open late next year, but there's new properties out there that will bring on staff, and they'll need good people. So the opportunities are there. They're just not as plentiful as they were.
Great, thank you. Would you encourage hotels in the city to contract with the City of Chicago special rates for healthcare workers and first responders to isolate and increase their cash flow?
There are challenges associated with that. If you are a medical facility, then that means that you need to retrain staff and have additional factors in place. I mean, you might even have the alert button that housekeepers were required or were legislated to have available to them in case of an emergency. And you'll need to equip guest rooms with those for people that are in medical situations. For healthcare workers, yes, but the part that comes with that is that you also need to be more stringent in your sanitation and cleaning requirements. That people that occupy a room that have been exposed or potentially exposed, you're going to have to go through and refurbish those rooms, and not refurbish, but clean those rooms. And that means cleaning and washing everything, including carpeting, spreads, drapes, anything that could be contaminated. So there is a higher responsibility for accommodating those as well. So with the additional revenue, that additional cost.
Do you anticipate that some hotels will not reopen?
Yes, I would expect that over 2,000 rooms will not open. The interesting thing is that some of those properties may be loop properties that were recently redone that became hotels because of a repurposing of an existing building. And the market for those properties isn't as strong, and there may be a market for residential or office that may price them at a point where someone else will have a better use for them. The lower end properties have been performing very well in the market. Their occupancy levels have dropped to about 40%. Well, very well. 40% isn't well, but they've always had a very substantial base of operation of extended stay and long term. Properties that are closed now will probably reopen. And they will reopen as the market bounces back. Other investors may be involved in it. Acquisitions may occur. Yes, I would expect that probably 2,000 rooms will basically step out of the market and not come back as hotels.
Okay. Are there investors and project owners still interested in feasibility studies in this COVID-19 environment? And if so, why?
I have 4 projects at the present time moving forward with feasibility studies. They are pocket markets or replacement properties for older, obsolete properties in the market. Many of our suburbs have a big inventory of properties, but most of those were built in the 1980s, maybe early 1990s. And so you've got 35-year-old properties that are not current in terms of technology or expectation properties, and these are replacement ones. And they're also in markets where there's been some strong economic development and a bit of commercial activity. So warehousing, distribution, manufacturing. So yes, there are markets where properties are being built. Again, the other area that we see is the West Loop area of Chicago, with all of the relocations to that market area. That market, as it moves forward, is going to require additional rooms. So yes, there are feasibility studies, not as many. We're also seeing properties that are under construction and they're very slow. They used to work 2 shifts because they wanted to open this spring. They're working 1 shift and planning on this fall. Properties that have the blueprints and have gone through permitting, those are kind of sitting on a table and waiting for some good indicators before they're going to move forward. But developers are out there taking a look at opportunities in the market because developers make money by developing. They're looking all the time for opportunities.
All right. I think that actually wraps up the questions. There were quite a few questions today too. That was very exciting. Thank you all of you who asked a question. Thank you so much for the presentation, Ted. This was actually really informative, really fascinating. Thank you for all of you for joining us today. I love that there were new faces. I hope to see you back again, or getting lots of applause around the room from everyone. Lots of thank yous as well. Oh, we have someone who really loved your charts, and
Thank you, Rick.
that actually was another person. So someone from outside of NLU really liked your charts. So Ted, is there anything else you would like to say to us before we depart?
Well, we've been through this before. Not as severe, not one that is caused by a epidemic like this that is been disastrous to the market area, but it's something that we will recover from, and it depends upon how soon we can either loosen the restrictions or come up with a cure or a vaccination that's going to stop the spread. But 5 years from now, we'll look back at this as a very challenging time where we learned a lot.
Okay, well, thank you again. Thank you for all of you for joining us today, this Friday. I hope that everyone has a fantastic, relaxing weekend at home, and that you all have some kind of fun activity that you can do for yourself. The schedule for next week will be coming out this weekend, so check your emails. If you do not regularly get my email or you do not see, you can always reach out to me and also suggest topics you would like to see in the future, or if you have any questions for any of our instructors that have been presenting, please feel free to drop an email to taste@nl.edu, and I hope to see you guys next week sometime too. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Ted.
Thanks.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you, Ted. That was great. So, and I'll send the recording to you.